So in my previous video we looked at an alternate scenario where Daenerys remained in Essos, but many people rightly pointed out if Daenerys is in Essos then what's going on in Westeros? And I thought that was an excellent question, so let's find out. After Stannis Baratheon successfully defeated Mance Rayder's army at the Wall, he had his men round up thousands of Wildlings to be taken as prisoners. The few who escaped fled north. The king beyond the Wall, Mance Rayder, was given a choice: bend the knee and swear fealty to King Stannis Baratheon, or burn. The only reply Stannis ever got was, "We do not kneel." And despite the pleas from Jon Snow, Stannis Baratheon kept his word and Mance Rayder was burned alive, and the Wildlings were made to watch. Stannis Baratheon was a practical man. He knew winter was coming. He knew his men were from the south. He knew that over half of those men were sellswords, and they would undoubtedly start deserting once the winter snows came. If he was going to take the north, he would need northerners. And at the moment, the majority of the northern houses were far too scared of the Boltons to side with Stannis. In short, he needed the Wildlings, but he didn't know how to get them. So he consulted the one man who might know. Jon Snow told Stannis all about the Wildlings, or the Free Folk, and that all they wanted was a chance to live. Taking all this into account, Stannis approached the Wildlings with a slightly different offer. They would not have to bend the knee, but they would have to swear an oath of allegiance to him, and they would have to fight for him and help him claim the Iron Throne. In exchange, they would be made citizens of the realm, and each one of them would be given a plot of land in a place of their choosing. Anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms, they would even be given a bit of gold to help them start. If, of course, Stannis was king. And if they rejected this offer, they would be turned over to the Night's Watch, and they had a pretty good idea of what fate would await them. Unsurprisingly, the majority of the Wildlings accepted the offer and swore the oath to King Stannis. In all honesty, the majority of them didn't know what an oath was or just didn't care. It was just words after all, and it was certainly a lot better than being a prisoner of the Night's Watch. One Wildling who rejected the offer was Tormund Giantsbane. Although he conceded that it was a good offer, his pride would not let him fight for the man who murdered his best friend and king. However, Jon Snow hoped that he could convince Tormund to change his mind. However, in the meantime, Jon needed Tormund's help to bring the rest of the Wildlings south of the Wall. With his army almost assembled, Stannis only needed one more piece, a Stark, and he just so happened to have one. Well, half a Stark anyway. Stannis approached Jon with an offer to make him Jon Stark and name him Warden of the North once he had taken Winterfell. Jon was honoured beyond belief. Everything he ever wanted could be his if he just said yes, but he couldn't. He had sworn a sacred oath to the Night's Watch, an oath that could only be broken by death. To betray this oath would be to betray everything that he believed in, everything that his father believed in, and that is something he could not do. So the offer was declined. Although Stannis was visibly annoyed by Jon's decision, secretly he respected Jon even more now. He told the boy that he'd make a fine Lord Commander, which is quite ironic because the next day Jon Snow won the vote and became the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. His first task was to enlist the help of Tormund to bring the rest of the Wildlings south of the Wall before it was too late. Tormund eventually told Jon that the remaining Free Folk had fled to Hardhome and that he was willing to go north to bring them back as long as Jon agreed to go with him. Seeing no alternative, Jon agreed. Jon even convinced Stannis to let them use his fleet. Stannis hoped that he would gain further reinforcements from these new Wildlings. So Jon, Tormund and a few members of the Night's Watch set off, while Stannis and his army did the same and began to march to Winterfell. But when they were a few miles away from Castle Black, something unfortunate happened. For that night, a terrible snowstorm fell upon the Wall, covering the surrounding area in a thick layer of snow and ice. No one could march an army through that, so they were stuck. And as Stannis predicted, his sellswords started to desert. And as things began to look dire, the Red Woman began to whisper in Stannis' ear. She told him that there was a way to clear the snows, but it would require his daughter. She would need to be sacrificed to the Lord of Light. Stannis was outraged. He utterly rejected the Red Woman's suggestion. Even though the snows became heavier and heavier, even though more and more of his army were deserting, he still rejected the Red Woman's pleas outright. But truth be told, as the situation grew ever more dire, Stannis began to have darker thoughts. Maybe the Red Woman was right. Maybe this really was the only way. Maybe this was the price for the Iron Throne, but it would seem that the gods had other ideas, for the snows that had blanketed the area began to clear on their own, without the need for any kind of sacrifice. This made him suspicious of the Red Woman, and Stannis began to doubt his faith. That is when Stannis received urgent news from Castle Black. Jon Snow had returned from Hardhome with the remaining Wildlings. The letter detailed the massacre that had happened there and the army of the dead which was marching on the wall. Although deeply troubled by this, Stannis knew that he would need all of the living to stand against the dead, and he had no choice. He had to press on. However, he ordered the Lady Melisandre back to Castle Black, as her talents would not be needed in a siege. Instead, she should convert the remaining Wildlings at Castle Black to his cause. Truth be told, he no longer trusted her, and he had lost faith in her fire god, and most importantly, he wanted to keep her as far away from his daughter as possible. As Stannis and his army marched on Winterfell, the Boltons were preparing. They had heard that Stannis had recruited Wildlings into his army, and that he now had a large army. Roose Bolton knew that he could not defeat Stannis in the field, but he also knew that he could bleed the Baratheons dry outside the walls of Winterfell. He ordered his son Ramsay Bolton to scour the surrounding lands of everything and anything of value and bring it to Winterfell and burn the rest. The Baratheons would have nothing, no food, no shelter, and no way to resupply. They would either die of starvation or arrows. Stannis could see the fires raging from his war camp, and he knew exactly what was happening. Time was running out. The siege of Winterfell had to begin now. The next day, Stannis' army surrounded Winterfell and began to dig trenches. Foraging parties were sent out, although many did not return. The siege of Winterfell had begun. The Baratheons built siege towers and rudimentary catapults, but the walls of Winterfell were strong and well defended, and each assault cost the Baratheons dearly. As the days turned to weeks, the situation grew increasingly dire. The Baratheon bodies were piling up, and the snows were getting heavier. Food was scarce, and foraging parties were being picked off by Bolton cavalry, who could move with impunity as the Baratheons had been forced to eat their horses. Desertion was at an all-time high, and they were still no closer to breaching the walls. Behind the walls of Winterfell, the Boltons were laughing and feasting, already drunk on their inevitable victory. They had enough food and supplies to last them for 2 years, whereas Stannis barely had enough to last 2 months. Their walls were holding strong, and they had fended off every Baratheon assault. Every night they feasted like kings, and they made damn well sure that the starving Baratheons outside could smell the food and hear their laughter and their songs. Yet another cruel way to demoralize Stannis' army. Roose Bolton was already planning his great victory. He would be the man to defeat Stannis Baratheon, the greatest tactician of his generation. Lord Bolton's plan was to let Stannis' army bleed itself dry against the walls of Winterfell, and once victory was assured, he would ride out and crush whatever was left of the Baratheon army. He had already sharpened his knives in anticipation of flaying Stannis alive. But perhaps Lord Bolton was too arrogant, too sure of victory. He had forgotten who his adversary was, for Stannis was already working on a new plan to take Winterfell. His men were working tirelessly around the clock to dig a tunnel straight to Winterfell. With any luck, the tunnel would lead them right to the Winterfell courtyard, bypassing all the castle's defences. His army just needed to hold out long enough to be able to complete it. One night, while Stannis was in his tent, a messenger arrived with yet more bad news. Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, was dead, murdered by his own officers. This was terrible news for Stannis. Not only did he like and respect the boy, but what little supplies his army were receiving were being dropped off by his fleet at Eastwatch by the sea, then travelling through Castle Black on the way to Stannis. And now that Sir Alliser had taken control of the Night's Watch, he would most likely declare them neutral again. This would completely sever Stannis' supply lines. Sir Davos Seaworth was sent north with 150 men-at-arms. His orders were to take control of Castle Black by any means necessary, but by the time Sir Davos and his men arrived at Castle Black, it had already been taken by Tormund Giantsbane and the Wildlings, for Ed was able to escape from Castle Black and warn Tormund of the betrayal. Ed informed Sir Davos that Sir Alliser and the other traders had been locked away in the dungeon. Castle Black was theirs again. Sir Davos was taken to see Jon Snow's body. Upon seeing it, the first thing he did was to seek out the Red Woman, who was still at Castle Black. She had fallen into a depression after being banished to Winterfell by her king. mind. She had even begun to doubt her own faith. Maybe the flames were wrong. Maybe Stannis wasn't the Lord's champion. Maybe there was no champion. Maybe there was no Lord of Light. Regardless of this, Sir Davos was able to convince her to at least try and bring Jon back. He told the Red Woman that if she was able to do this, it would undoubtedly bring her back into King Stannis' council. So the Lady Melisandre agreed. She spoke the ancient words. She performed the ritual. She did everything that she could, although secretly she did not believe it herself. But by some miracle or divine intervention, it worked, and Jon Snow returned. After Jon had recovered and dealt with the traitors, he declared that his watch was now over. Sir Davos then informed Jon of what was going on at Winterfell. The siege of Winterfell was going badly, but maybe, just maybe, with Jon's help, they could prevail. Jon Snow knew Winterfell better than any of them. Jon Snow could avenge the Red Wedding, he could avenge his family, and he could save his sister. Sir Davos told Jon that his spies in the castle had informed him that Sansa Stark was still alive. But if Stannis were to storm the castle, he could not guarantee Sansa's safety. Hearing all of this, Jon Snow agreed to go to Winterfell to help Stannis and to avenge his family and save his sister. He also spoke to Tormund to try to convince him to come as well. At first Tormund was not interested. "I'm not fighting for no Southern King," he scoffed. "But what about the free folk that are fighting with Stannis? If he loses, they'll all die," Jon replied. "That's nothing to do with me, boy. They made their decision. And what about the free folk up here? The children, the old, the sick? Once the Boltons are done with Stannis, they'll come for them next." Tormund hesitated, then thought for a while, before talking. "I'll not fight for no Southern King, especially one who burnt my friend to death. But maybe I'll fight for you, Jon Snow." Jon Snow and Tormund Giantsbane then joined Sir Davos and his men on their way back to Winterfell. But as they were approaching Winterfell, they met someone they didn't expect to see. Brienne of Tarth and Podrick Payne. At first, the mood was tense. Swords were drawn as Brienne recognized Sir Davos and Stannis' men. Sir Davos asked Brienne what she was doing this far north. She told him that she had come north to fulfill her oath to Lady Catelyn Stark and to protect Sansa Stark, and to avenge her murdered king. "We all grieve for Renly, milady, but Stannis is the one true king. Stannis is a usurper and a murderer. He killed his own brother using blood magic." Sir Davos went quiet for a moment, for he knew the truth. Regardless of what he may or may not have done, Stannis is still your king, and he is still the only man who can save the realm. "I'm not interested in saving the realm, I'm only interested in saving Lady Sansa." "And so am I. I'm Jon Snow, milady." Podrick immediately recognized the name Jon Snow, as well as his description. Lord Tyrion had told him about Jon Snow. "You're Lady Sansa's brother, aren't you?" Podrick asked. "Aye, that's me, and I'm going to Winterfell to save her. Come with us, Lady Brienne. We could use your help." "I'm not fighting for Stannis Baratheon." "I'm not asking you to fight for Stannis. I'm not asking you to forget you're dead. I'm not asking you to forgive. I'm asking you to fight for the living, to fight for Sansa. You know what the Boltons are like. You know what they're going to do to her. You know what they have already done to her. I know you don't want to hear it, but Stannis is her only hope. Put aside your hatred of Stannis for now, so that you can finally fulfill your oath and save Lady Sansa Stark." Lady Brienne reluctantly agreed. "But I'll not fight for Stannis," she snapped. The company then made their way to Stannis' siege camp, but the situation had gotten worse. Work on the tunnel had slowed considerably. Morale had been decimated. There were desertions daily. Although the walls of Winterfell had been weakened, yes, they still stood. Stannis met Jon, Sir Davos and Lady Brienne in his tent. After the awkward pleasantries had been exchanged, Jon told Stannis of his plan. He knew of a secret passage that led to the crypts of Winterfell. It wasn't very big. They could never get an army through, but they could get, say, 6 good men or women through. Jon Snow's plan was that he, Lady Brienne and Tormund Giantsbane, alongside 3 of Stannis' best knights, would enter Winterfell through the secret passageway during the dead of night, seize control of the gatehouse and open the gates of Winterfell for Stannis' army. A simple, yet very dangerous plan. Stannis, although not sure of the plan, saw no alternative, so agreed to it. The company snuck into the castle and cleared the walls of its sentries, and seized seized the gatehouse, but just as they were starting to open the gates, the alarm bells rang, and Bolton soldiers came running at them. Lady Brienne, alongside the 3 other knights, held the Bolton soldiers at bay, while Jon and Tormund opened the gates and gave the signal for Stannis' army to attack. They then rushed to Lady Brienne's aid. The Baratheon knights fought valiantly but were cut down, but just as it looked like the 3 were about to join them, Stannis Baratheon came charging through the gates wielding a flaming sword. Only seconds behind him was his entire army. Baratheon and Bolton clashed at the gates of Winterfell. The battle inside the walls was bloody. Bolton reinforcements came out of everywhere. The Baratheon forces began to push into the courtyard of Winterfell. Slowly but surely they began to gain more and more ground, pushing the Boltons back inch by bloody inch. Lady Brienne attempted to rush into the castle to save Lady Sansa but was caught up in the melee. Realising the battle was turning, Roose Bolton ordered every soldier to the courtyard before joining the battle alongside his son, but by now the Baratheons were at the gates of the main hall itself. In the chaos, Roose Bolton faced off against Stannis. Roose Bolton and Stannis Baratheon were well matched, both landing blow upon blow against each other. Roose was able to get behind and slice the back of Stannis' leg, forcing him to the ground. But before Roose Bolton could land the final blow, Stannis was able to stab his sword straight through his knee. As Roose Bolton fell to the ground, Stannis quickly stood up and with one swing of his sword decapitated the traitor. Seeing his father die, Ramsay Bolton quickly realised that the battle was lost, and it was time for him to leave, but before he did, he had one final score to settle. He grabbed a nearby Bolton soldier and said, "Kill the Stark bitch. If the bastard wants his sister, he can have her head." Ramsay then fled towards the stables. Jon Snow, who was right in the heart of the battle, witnessed Ramsay flee, so he gave chase. While this was happening, 6 Bolton soldiers made their way to Lady Sansa's bedchambers, but just as they got to her chambers, they found that the entrance was blocked by Reek, who stood right in front of her door, twitching. "Get out of the fucking way, Reek." "I am not Reek. My name is Theon Greyjoy," Theon shouted before picking up a sword. At the back entrance of the castle of Winterfell, Ramsay prepared to make his escape on horseback, but he found his exit blocked by a very bloodied and very angry Jon Snow. "As the new Lord Bolton and Warden of the North, I hereby yield Winterfell to you, bastard. Now take it and get out of my way." Jon never said a word. He simply stared and gripped his sword tighter. "I thought as much. Huh. Call yourself a Northerner? What kind of Northerner sides with Wildlings? What kind of Northerner abandons the Night's Watch? What kind of Northerner leads a southern king into his own home to murder his own people?" This finally made Jon snap. "You are not my people. You are monsters and traitors. This is not murder. This is justice. There is no justice in this world, you dumb cunt. But maybe you'll find it in the next." Ramsay then quickly grabbed a bow and a few arrows from out of his horse's saddle and began firing at Jon. Reacting quickly, Jon grabbed a nearby shield and began charging at Ramsay. Ramsay let off arrow after arrow, but Jon was able to block them all. Jon was able to quickly close the gap, knocking Ramsay to the ground before he had a chance to grab his sword. He then beat Ramsay Bolton into a bloody pulp, but stopped just short of killing him. Ramsay looked up at Jon, his mouth full of blood. "Finish me, bastard. Your life isn't mine to take, bastard." Not long after this, the remaining soldiers of House Bolton laid down their swords and surrendered. The day was won, and Winterfell now belonged to Stannis Baratheon, and his flaming heart banner flew over the towers of Winterfell. But victory had come at a terrible price. Stannis had lost over half of his army during the siege of Winterfell. He needed the support of the northern houses if he ever hoped to take the Iron Throne. He needed a Stark now more than ever. Speaking of Starks, after the battle, Lady Brienne searched throughout Winterfell trying to find Lady Sansa. She finally came to the hallway where Sansa Stark's chambers were, and to her surprise, Lady Brienne found 6 dead Bolton soldiers. Stepping over the bodies, then she saw it. Right in front of Lady Sansa's door, the body of Theon Greyjoy, which was covered in deep wounds. Lady Brienne concluded that Theon Greyjoy must have put up one hell of a fight before finally succumbing to his injuries. Lady Brienne opened the door and found Lady Sansa Stark sat in her bedchambers. After explaining to the young girl who she was, what had happened, and who had sent her, Lady Brienne of Tarth pledged herself himself to Lady Sansa Stark and began to lead her out of her bedchambers. But upon seeing Theon's body, Sansa fell to the ground and began to weep. She told Lady Brienne that during the fighting, Theon locked her inside her bedchambers and sworn that he would give his life to protect her, and he had fulfilled his oath. Lady Brienne stated that Theon Greyjoy had died an honourable death, and he should be praised for that. While being led into the courtyard of Winterfell, Sansa met Jon. The two immediately embraced each other, their long overdue reunion, but this was cut short by the arrival of Stannis Baratheon. "My lady, we feared the worst. I am glad to see you are unharmed." "I am, your grace, thanks to my brother, Theon Greyjoy, who died protecting me." "An honourable Greyjoy? Huh. I never thought I'd see the day." "My lady, we have not met, but I knew your father. He was a good and honourable man." "Yes, your grace. My father always spoke very highly of you. He always said that you would make a good king. I pray that he is right. But I cannot be a good king while the usurpers who murdered your father still sit the Iron Throne. I intend to take it from them, but in order to do so, I need your help, my lady." "You mean you need my name, your grace?" "An ancient name carries weight, my lady. An ancient name has power, real power that you can use." "And what would you have me do with this power, your grace?" "I would declare you Wardeness of the North. I would have all your ancestral titles, lands and claims returned to you. In exchange, you will pledge your banners to me, support my claim to the Iron Throne, and rally the Northern houses behind my cause. And if you do this, I swear that I will make those responsible for your family's destruction pay." "In that case, I agree to your terms, your grace." With that, Stannis Baratheon gave a nod and took his leave. Jon Snow told Lady Sansa that he had a gift for her. That gift was Ramsay Bolton, whose life was now hers. So Lady Sansa had Ramsay fed to his own dogs, thus ending the cursed line of House Bolton. Finally, a step in the right direction, Stannis thought to himself as he looked over his war map. But he was no fool. He knew that one kingdom wasn't enough to take the Iron Throne. He also knew that his army was depleted and the northern houses had been bled dry by the War of the Five Kings. In short, he needed allies. But where would he find these allies? In the Vale, perhaps? After all, Lord Arryn and Lady Sansa were kin, and Peter Baelish's love of Catelyn Stark was well known. Perhaps that love might also extend to her daughter, and maybe the Iron Islands as well. Now that Balon Greyjoy was dead, surely Lady Yara Greyjoy would rule the Iron Islands, and she would hopefully be a lot more reasonable than her father was. But while Stannis was thinking about this, another thought crept into his head. He knew that by now word would have gotten to his adversary of his victory at Winterfell, and while he was making plans, his adversary was doing the same. Stannis knew that only a fool would underestimate that man, and he knew that sooner rather than later he would have to face him. He would have to face Lord Tywin Lannister. But how can Tywin still be alive in this timeline? Well, that, my friends, is a story for another day.